The Śūraṅgama Sūtra. Enlightenment in Mahayana Buddhism consists in transmuting the mind into the great mirror wisdom. And so, the Śūraṅgama Sūtra points directly at the mind, which, when stirred by the first thought, creates the basic illusion of an ego and splits the whole into subject and object. In consequence, it is still a primary source for the Chan or Zen school. In this sutra, the Buddha began by stripping Ananda of this attachment to the illusory body and mind before revealing the one mind. To teach how this one mind can be realized, he asked 25 bodhisattvas to describe the different methods by which each had attained enlightenment. Avalokiteshvara's method was judged the most suitable for mankind today. The Buddha disclosed the cause of transmigration through the 6 worlds and of the attainment of the 4 saintly planes, describing these 10 reasons in some detail. Finally, he detailed and warned against clinging to the various mental states experienced when practicing the Śūraṅgama Samadhi. Most in the West know of the creation according to the Bible, but readers will now find in this sutra how man and his world come into being as taught by the Buddha. We take refuge in the Buddha. We take refuge in the Dharma. We take refuge in the Sangha. We take refuge in the triple gem within ourselves. The nomenon in the Tathagata store. Thus have I heard. Once the Buddha stayed in the Jetavana Vihara near Sravasti with 1,250 bhikkhus, most of whom were great arhats, who had crossed the stream of transmigration. They upheld his teaching firmly, could leap over all realms of existence, and had achieved the respect-inspiring deportment which was held in great esteem throughout the country. They followed the Buddha to turn the wheel of the law and were qualified to hand down his dharma. Being self-disciplined, they set a good example in the 3 worlds in which they appeared in countless transformation bodies to deliver living beings and to save future generations from defilement. They were led by Sariputra, the wise, Mahamaukalyana, Mahakaushila, Purnamaitra Vaniputra, Subhuti, and Upanishad. There were also countless Pratyayaka Buddhas, who, since they had conquered their old habits, had nothing more to learn, yet came to the Buddha's vihara, determined to seek ultimate truth. Now the summer retreat had just finished when the bhikkhus took stock of their errors and mistakes, and when the bodhisattvas from the 10 directions, determined to wipe out their remaining doubts and suspicions, reverently awaited the teaching in their search for its esoteric meaning. And so the Tathagata arranged his seat and sat with crossed legs to proclaim the profound doctrine. Such a dharma feast to purify the assembly had never taken place before, and his melodious voice was hard as the 10 quarters. Led by Manjusri, a number of bodhisattvas as countless as sand grains in Gangas had come to the holy place. Meanwhile, King Prasyanajit, who was keeping the anniversary of his father's death by offering vegetarian food to him, came personally to invite the Tathagata to the inner palace for a royal feast of best and rarest delicacies, to which he also invited the great bodhisattvas in the assembly. In the city, the elders and devotees also offered food to members of the order and reverently waited for the Buddha's arrival. Ananda's weakness, the reason for this sermon. Commanded by the Buddha, Manjusri took the bodhisattvas and arhats to the royal feast. Ananda, however, had not come back from a distant engagement, and so was not among the invited. He was returning to the vihara alone without his superior or teacher, and bowl in hand went begging from door to door in a nearby town. He attended to call first on a donor who had not given food to the monks that day, regardless of whether or not he was virtuous, a noble, or an outcast. In his practice of universal compassion, he did not especially choose a poor man as his patron. He wanted to help all living beings earn countless merits, for he had seen the Buddha scold Subhuti and Mahakashapa, who, through being arhats, could not realize universal mind when begging for food. He was much admired, his teaching, which had eliminated all his doubts and suspicions in this respect. So, when he reached the town's gate, he walked slowly, adjusting his mien to the rules of discipline. As he went begging for food, he came to a house of prostitution where Matangi succeeded by means of Kapila magic in drawing him close to her sensual body on the mat, so that he was on the point of breaking the rules of pure living. But the Buddha was aware of all this, and after the royal feast, he returned to the Vihara with the king, princes, and elders who wished to hear about the essentials of the Dharma. He then sent out from the top of his head a bright and triumphant multicolored light, within which appeared a transformation Buddha seated with crossed legs on a 1,000-petaled lotus. The Buddha then repeated the transcendental mantra and ordered Manjusri to use it to overcome the magic and to bring Ananda with Matangi to the Vihara. Meditative study of all as void, samatha. When Ananda saw the Buddha, he prostrated himself at his feet, weeping bitterly and saying that since the time without beginning, though he had heard much about the Dharma, he still could not acquire the transcendental power of the Tao. Earnestly, he asked the Buddha to teach the preliminary expedients in the practice of samatha, samapatti, and dhyana, which led to the enlightenment of all Buddhas in the 10 directions. There were also present a great number of bodhisattvas, as countless as sand grains in the Gangas, and great arhats and pratyeka Buddhas who had come wishing to hear about the Dharma. They all waited silently and reverently for the holy teaching. Wiping out the 5 aggregates and 8 consciousness to expose the unreality of ego. Probing into the false mind to wipe out the first 2 aggregates and the first 5 consciousnesses. The Buddha said to Ananda, "You and I are close relatives. Tell me what you saw in the assembly when you made up your mind to give up all worldly feelings of affection and love to follow me." Ananda replied, "I saw the 32 excellent characteristics and the shining crystal-like form of the Buddha's body. I thought that all this could not be the result of desire and love, for desire creates foul and fetid impurities like pus and blood, which mingle and cannot produce the wondrous brightness of his golden-hued body, in admiration of which I shaved my head to follow him." The Buddha said, "Ananda, and all of you should know that living beings, since the time without beginning, have been subject continuously to birth and death because they do not know the permanent true mind, whose substance is by nature pure and right. They have relied on false thinking, which is not reality, so that the wheel of samsara turns. Now, if you wish to study the unsurpassed supreme Bodhi to realize this bright nature, you should answer my questions straightforwardly. All Buddhas in the 10 directions trod the same path to escape from birth and death because of their straightforward minds, with the same straightforwardness of mind and speech from start to finish without a trace of crookedness. Ananda, when you developed that mind because of the Buddha's 32 excellent characteristics, tell me what you saw and loved them." Ananda replied, "World-honored one, my love came from the use of my mind, my eyes seeing and my mind admiring them, so that it was set on relinquishing births and death." The Buddha continued, "As you just said, your love was caused by your mind and eyes, but if you do not know where your mind and eyes really are, you will never be able to destroy delusion. For instance, when the country is invaded by bandits, the king, before sending his soldiers to destroy them, should first know where they are. That which causes you to transmigrate without interruption comes from defects in your mind and eyes. Now tell me where your mind and eyes are. Ananda replied, World-honored one, all living beings born in the world through the 10 types of birth hold that this knowing mind is in the body. As I look at the lotus blue eyes of the Buddha, I see that they are on his face. Hence, my understanding that my eyes are on my face, whereas my knowing mind is in my body. The Buddha asked, Now, as you sit in this hall, where do you see Jetavana Park? Ananda replied, World-honored one, this great hall is in Jetavana Park, which is therefore outside the hall. The Buddha asked, What do you see first in this hall? Ananda replied, World-honored one, in this hall, I see first the Tathagata, then the assembly, and only when looking outside do I see the park. The Buddha asked, When you see the park, what causes you to do so? Ananda replied, It is because the doors and windows are open that I, though sitting in this hall, see the park outside. The Buddha then extended his golden-hued arm and touched Ananda's head with his hand, saying, There is a samadhi called the all-embracing supreme Śūraṅgama, a gateway through which all Buddhas in the 10 directions attain to the wondrous The Buddha then extended his golden-hued arm and touched Ananda's head with his hand, saying, There is a samadhi called the all-embracing supreme Śūraṅgama, a gateway through which all Buddhas in 10 directions attained to the wondrous majestic path. Ananda, listen now attentively. Ananda prostrated himself at the Buddha's feet and knelt to receive the holy instruction. The Buddha said, If you are right that while sitting in this hall, you see the park outside through open doors and windows, it would be possible for someone sitting here to see only things outside without seeing the Buddha within. Let me say this again. The Buddha said, If you are right that while sitting in this hall, you see the park outside through open doors and windows, it would be possible for someone sitting here to see only things outside without seeing the Buddha within. Ananda replied, One cannot see the grove and stream outside without seeing the Buddha here. The Buddha said, Ananda, it is the same with you. If your mind is not deluded, it will be clear about all this. However, if your knowing mind was really in your body, you should first be clear about everything inside it. You should, therefore, see everything in your body before seeing things outside it. Even if you cannot see your heart, liver, spleen, and stomach, at least you should be clear about your growing nails and hairs, about that which moves along your nerves and the pulsing of your veins. Why are you not clear about all this? If you do not see things within, how can you see those outside? Therefore, your contention that your knowing mind is inside your body is groundless. Ananda bowed and said, After hearing the Buddha's Dharma voice, I now understand that my mind is really outside my body. For instance, a lamp should light up everything in a room before the courtyard outside through the open door. If I do not see what is in my body but see things outside it, this is like a lamp placed outside a room which cannot light what is in it. This being so clear that there can be no doubt, am I still wrong about what the Buddha means? The Buddha said, All the bhikshus followed me to the Sravasti to beg for food and have now returned to Jetavana Park. I have taken my meal, but as one bhikshu is still eating, is the whole community well fed? Ananda replied, No, world-honored one, though they are arhats. They have not the same body or lifespan. Then how can one be eating cause all the others to satisfy their hunger? The Buddha said, If your knowing mind is outside your body, the two are separate. Thus, when your mind knows something, your body should not feel it, and when your body feels something, your mind should not be aware of it. Now, as I show you my hand, when your eyes see it, does your mind discern it? Ananda replied, Yes, world-honored one, my mind discerns it. The Buddha said, If so, how can your mind be outside your body? Therefore, your contention that your knowing and discerning mind is outside your body is groundless. Ananda said, World-honored one, as you have said, if my mind does not see what is in my body, it is not within it. And if my body and mind know each other, they are not separate, and my mind is, therefore, not outside my body. Now, after thinking about this, I know where my mind is. The Buddha asked, where is it? Ananda replied, since my knowing mind does not see what is in my body, but can you see things outside? I think it is hidden in my sense organ. For instance, if one covers one's eyes with a crystal ball, the latter does not obstruct this sense organ, which simply follows the faculty of seeing to distinguish all things seen. Thus, if my knowing mind does not see what is in my body, it is because it is in the sense organ. And if it is clearly what is outside without being obstructed, it is because it is hidden in that organ. The Buddha asked, as you just said, the mind is hidden in the same way that the eyes are covered by the crystal ball. Now, when one so covers them and sees the mountain and river, does one also see the bowl? Ananda replied, yes, world-honored one also sees the bowl. The Buddha said, if your mind is like the crystal bowl, when you see the mountain and river, why do you not see your own eyes? If you do, they should be outside and should not follow your faculty of seeing. If they cannot be seen, how can you say that this knowing mind is hidden in the sense organ like the eyes covered by the crystal bowl? Therefore, your contention that the knowing mind is hidden in the sense organ is groundless. Ananda asked, world-honored one, I now think of the bowels concealed in the body and of the apertures on its surface. Therefore, where there is concealment, there is darkness, and where there are openings, there is light. As I am now before the Buddha, I open my eyes and see clearly, and this is called outward seeing. And when I close them, I see only darkness, and this is called inward seeing. What does Buddha think of this? The Buddha said, when you close your eyes and see darkness, is this darkness opposite to your eyes or not? If it is in front of them. Then how can this be inward seeing? Even if there is really such inward seeing, when you sit in a dark room without the light or the sun, moon, or a lamp, this darkness should also be in your bowels. If it is not opposite to your eyes, how can there be any seeing? Now, let us forget your so-called outward seeing and assume that there is inward seeing. Then, when you close your eyes and see only darkness, which you call seeing, what is in your body? Why, when you open them and see clearly, do you not see your face? If you do not, there is no such inward seeing. Now, as assuming that you can see your face, your knowing mind and organ of sight should be in the air, and then how can there be inward seeing? If they were in the air, they should not belong to your body. And the Buddha, who now see your face, should be your body as well. Thus, when your eyes see something, your body should have no feeling. If you insist that both body and mind have separate feelings, there should be two separate perceptions, and then your body should one day become two Buddhas. Therefore, your contention that to see darkness is inward seeing is groundless. Ananda said, I have always heard the Buddha, when teaching monks, nuns, and male and female devotees, say, when the mind stirs, all sort of things are created, and then all kinds of mind appear. I now think that the substance of my thinking is the nature of mind which arises when it unites with externals, and which is neither within nor without nor in between. The Buddha said, you have just said that because phenomena are created, all kinds of mind appear when uniting with them. So this mind has no substance and cannot unite with anything. If that which has no substance can unite with externals, this is union of the 19th realm of sense with the 7th sense datum. This is sheer nonsense. If the mind has substance, when your hand grasps your body, does your mind feeling this touch come from within or without? If from within, you should see what is in your body, and if from without, you should see your face. Ananda said, it is the eyes that see, and the mind that knows. Is not the eyes to say that it sees is wrong. The Buddha said, if the eyes can see when you are in a room, do you see the door outside? Those who are dead and still have eyes should see things if they still see. How can they be dead? Ananda, if your knowing mind has substance, is that substance single or manifold? As it is in your body, does it spread to every part of it or not? If it is one substance, when you grasp a limb, all four should feel that they are grasped. If so, there would be no grasping of any particular limb. If there is, the contention of a single substance does not hold good. If it is a manifold substance, there should be many persons. Then which substance is yours if it spreads to every part of your body? This is the same as in the previous case of grasping. If it does not spread, then when you touch your head and foot at the same time, while your head feels that it is touched, your foot should not. But this is not so. Therefore, your contention that the mind arises when there is union with externals is groundless. Ananda said, world-honored one, I have heard the Buddha discuss reality with other sons of the kings of the law. the bodhisattvas. He also said that the mind is neither within nor without. I now deduce that if the mind is in the body, it does not see anything within, and if it is outside, they both cease to feel each other. To say that it is written is wrong, for it does not know anything in the body. To say that it is without is also faulty, since both body and mind can perceive each other. As they do so, and since nothing is seen in the body, the mind should be between the two, the inside and outside. The Buddha said, if your conception of a mind in between is correct, it implies a position for it. Now, according to your interference, where is this intermediate position? Do you mean that it is in or on the body? If it is on the surface of the body, it cannot be in its center. And the conception of a mind in the center is no different from that of a mind in the body, which was refuted earlier. Moreover, is its position manifest or not? If it is not, it does not exist. If it is not fixed. Why? For instance, if a stake is driven into the ground to mark a center, when seen from the east, it is in the west, and when seen from the south, it is in the north. As this state can only lead to confusion, so is your conception of a mind in between completely chaotic. Ananda said, the intermediate position that I mentioned is not these two. As the world-honored one has said, the eyes and the forms are cause from which sight perception arises. While the eyes can distinguish, form does not follow anything, and perception lies between them. Hence, the mind arises. The Buddha said, if the mind lies between sense organs and sense data, does it include both or not? If it does, its substance and what is outside will be mixed up together, and since the mind perceives while its object do not, two opposites will set up. Then how can there be an intermediate position? If it is not inclusive, that is, if it is independent of the sense organs and sense data, being neither the knower subject nor the known object, it has no substance. Then what is this intermediate? Therefore, your contention that it is in between is groundless. Ananda said, world-honored one, previously, when I saw the Buddha with his 4 chief disciples, Mahamodgalyayana, Subhuti, Purna Maitreya Yaniputra, and Sariputra, turn the wheel of the law, he always said that the nature of the knowing and discriminating mind is neither within nor without nor between the two, exists nowhere and clings to nothing, hence it is called mind. Is that which does not cling to things called mind? The Buddha replied, you just said that the nature of the knowing and discriminating mind exists nowhere. Now in this world, all things in the air, in the water, and on the ground, including those that fly and walk, make the existing whole. By that which does not cling to anything, do you mean that it exists or not? If it is not, it is just the hair of a tortoise or a horn of a hare. Then how can there be this extra non-clinging? If it is, it cannot be said not to exist. That which is not is simply non-existent, and that which is should have a position. Then how can there be no clinging? Therefore, your contention that which does not cling to anything is the knowing mind is groundless. Refuting the false mind to eliminate the third aggregate and expose the unreality of the sixth consciousness. Therefore, Ananda rose from his seat, uncovered his right shoulder, knelt upon his right knee, reverently joined the palms of his hands, and said to the Buddha, I am the Tathagata's youngest cousin, and because of his great affection, I have been allowed to be his disciple. But I have presumed on his compassion. And so, although I have heard much of his preaching, I have failed to avoid the worldly and have been unable to overcome the magic which has turned me round, causing me to visit a house of prostitution. All this is because I failed to reach the vision of reality. May the world-honored one be compassionate enough to teach us the path of samatha for the benefit of those lacking faith and holding perverted views. After saying this, he prostrated himself with knees, elbows, and hand on the ground. Then he stood up in reverent silence, with the whole assembly keenly awaiting the teaching, revealing the bright samadhi. By the Buddha's transcendental power, all sorts of rays of light, as brilliant as hundreds and thousands of suns, shone from his forehead, illuminating all the Buddha lands, which shook with 6 kinds of quake. Thus a number of worlds, uncountable as the dust, appeared simultaneously, and by the same power united into single world, wherein each of the great bodhisattvas, while staying in his own realm, brought his palms together to listen to the Dharma. Origin of inversion. The Buddha said, since the time without beginning, all living beings have given rise to all sorts of inversion because of the karmic seed of ignorance, which is like the aksha shrub. This is why seekers of the truth fail to realize supreme enlightenment, but achieve only the states of sravakas, pratyeka Buddhas, heretics, devas, and demons, solely because they do not know the 2 basic inversions, thereby practicing wrongly, like those who cannot get food by cooking sand in spite of the passing of eons as countless as the dust. What are these two basic inversions? Ananda, the first is the basic root of birth and death, caused since the time without beginning by the wrong use of a clinging mind, which people mistake for their own nature. And the second is their attachment to the casual conditions, which screen the basically bright essence of consciousness, which is the fundamentally pure and clean substance of nirvanic enlightenment. Thus, they ignore this basic brightness and so transmigrate through illusory realms of existence without realizing the futility of their wrong practice. Actual inversion, the inverted mind. Probe into the false mind, Ananda. As you have inquired about samatha gateway through which to escape from birth and death, I must ask you a question. The Buddha then held up his golden-hued arm and bent his finger, saying, Ananda, do you see this? Ananda replied, yes. The Buddha asked, what do you see? Ananda replied, I see the Buddha raise his arm and bend his fingers, showing a shining fist that dazzles my mind and eyes. The Buddha asked, how do you see it? Ananda replied, I and all those here use the eyes to see it. The Buddha asked, you say that I bend my fingers to show a shining feast that dazzles your mind and eyes. Now tell me, as you see my fist, what is that mind which perceives its brightness? Ananda replied, as the Tathagata asks about the mind, and since I'm using my own to search for it exhaustively, I conclude that that which searches is my mind. Thinking is unreal, the Buddha said. Hey, Ananda, this is not your mind. Ananda stared with astonishment, brought his two palms together, rose from his seat and asked, if this is not my mind, what is it? The Buddha replied, Ananda, this is your false thinking, which arises from external objects, deludes your true nature, and deceives you into mistaking, since the time without beginning, a thief for your own son, thereby losing sight of that which is basically permanent, hence the round of birth and death. The sixth consciousness is empty. Ananda said, I am the Buddha's beloved youngest cousin, whose mind so admired him that I left home to serve and make offerings to the Tathagata and to all Buddhas and enlightened teachers in lands as countless as sand grains in the Ganges. If I am determined to do all difficult dharma duties, it is because I use this mind, and if I now slander the dharma, causing my excellent qualities to weaken forever, it is also because of this mind. If it was not mine, I would have no mind, and would be like the earth or a log, for nothing exists beyond what I feel and know. Why does the Buddha now say that it is not mine? This frightens me and also this assembly, and not one of us here can avoid being doubtful and suspicious about it. Will you be so compassionate as to enlighten us? From his lion's seat, the Buddha, in order to teach Ananda and the assembly so that they could all achieve the patient endurance of the uncreate, Anuttatika Karma Santi, held out his hand to touch Ananda's head, saying, the Tathagata has always said that all phenomena are manifestations of mind, and that all causes and effect, including all things from the world to its dust, take shape solely because of the mind. Ananda, if we look at all the worlds and all the existing things, including even grass and leaves, and investigate their roots, they are all made of matter and have qualities, and even the empty void has its name and appearance. Then how can the pure and clean, profound, bright mind, which is the underlying nature of every discriminating mind, be without its own substance? If you grasp firmly the knowledge which comes from your discriminating between feeling and seeing as your true mind, it should have its own nature independent of all sense data such as form, smell, taste, and touch. As you now listen to my sermon on the Dharma, you differentiate because you hear my voice. The seventh consciousness is unreal. Even if you succeed in putting an end to all seeing, hearing, feeling, and knowing, and so preserve inner quiet, the shadow of your differentiation of things, Dharma, still remains. I do not want you to hold that this is not mind, but you should examine it carefully and minutely. That which continues to possess discerning nature even in the absence of sense data is really your mind. On the other hand, if this discerning nature ceases with sense data, this is merely the shadow of your differentiation of them, for they are not permanent, and when they cease to exist, so does this so-called mind, like the hair of a tortoise and the horns of a hare. If your Dharmakaya can so easily cease to be, who will then practice and realize the patient endurance of the uncreate? And after hearing this, Ananda and all those present were completely bewildered. Refuting all inversion, the Buddha said, practicing students, even after they have realized the 9 successive states of dhyana, still cannot step out of the stream of transmigration and so fail to become arhats because they cling to this samsaric false thinking which they mistake for reality. This is why, though you have heard much of my dharma, you have failed to win the holy fruit. The inverted perception. After hearing this, Ananda, in bitter tears, prostrated himself with his head, knees, and elbows on the ground, knelt and brought his 2 palms together, saying, after I left home to follow the Buddha, I merely relied on his transcendental power and always thought that I could dispense with practice since he would bestow samadhi upon me. I did not know that he could not be my substitute and so lost sight of my fundamental mind. This is why, though I joined the order, my mind was unable to enter the Tao. I was like a destitute son running away from his father. I only realize now that in spite of much listening to the Dharma, if I do not practice it, I shall come to nothing as if I had not heard it, like a man who cannot satisfy his hunger by merely speaking of food. World-honored one, I am caught by the 2 hindrances because I do not know the real nature of the still and permanent mind. May the Tathagata be compassionate enough to fully reveal to me that wondrous bright mind and so open my Tao eye, a bright light to reveal the one reality. Thereupon, the Tathagata, from the Svastika on his chest, sent out a radiant, multicolored, precious light which illuminated the Buddha lands in 10 directions, as countless as the dust, and which, after shining on the heads of all Buddhas everywhere, veered to Ananda and the assembly. The Buddha then said to Ananda, I now hoist the banner of great Dharma so that you and all living beings in the 10 directions can realize the pure and bright mind of your profound and subtle nature and so win that eye that is pure and clear. Returning perception to mind. Ananda, a moment ago you said that you saw my shining fist. Tell me, how did its brightness come about? What caused it to take the form of a fist, and with what did you see it? Ananda replied, the Buddha's golden-hued body is like a precious hill and manifests the state of purity and cleanness, so that the fist shone. It was really my eyes that saw him bend the fingers and form a fist which was shown to all of us. The Buddha said, in truth, wise people should be awakened by examples and analogies, Ananda. If I had no hand, I would have no fist, and if you had no eyes, you would have no faculty of seeing. Is there any connection between your organ of sight and my fist? Ananda replied, yes, world-honored one. If I had no eyes, I would have no faculty of seeing, so there is an analogy between my organ of sight and the Buddha's fist. The Buddha said, your reasoning is incorrect. For instance, a handless man has no fist, but a man without eyes still has his faculty of seeing. When you meet a blind man and ask what he sees, he will tell you there is nothing but darkness in front of him. Therefore, through things may be screened from view, the faculty of seeing continues. Ananda said, if a blind man sees nothing but darkness before him, how can this be called seeing? The Buddha asked, is there any difference between the darkness seen by a blind man in front of him and that seen by a blind who is not blind when he is in a dark room? Ananda replied, world-honored one, there is no difference. The Buddha said, Ananda, when a blind man who used to see only darkness suddenly recovers his sight and sees everything clearly, if you say that it is his eyes which see, then when a man who saw darkness in a dark room suddenly lights a lamp which enables him to see what is there, you should say that it is the lamp that sees. If a lamp can see things, it should have the faculty of seeing and should not be called a lamp. If it really sees, it has no relation to you. Therefore, you should know that while the lamp can reveal form, seeing comes from the eyes, but not from the lamp. Likewise, while your eyes can reveal form, the nature of seeing comes from the mind, but not from the eyes. Inverted men. Although Ananda said the assembly had heard these words, they remained speechless. As they did not awaken to the teaching, they brought their palms together and waited for the Buddha's further instruction, with their minds set on hearing it. The wording's inverted views. The Buddha then held up his shining hand, straightened his fingers to give further instruction to Ananda and assembly, and asked, after I attained enlightenment, Bodhi, I went to Mragadava Park, where I told Ajnata Kaundinya and his group of 5 bhikshus, as well as you monks, nuns, and devotees, that all living beings failed to realize enlightenment and became arahats because they were misled by foreign dust, which created delusion and distress by entering their minds. What at that time caused you to awaken so that you can now win the holy fruit? Ajnata Kaundinya then rose from his seat and replied to the Buddha, I am now a senior in the assembly, in which I am the only one who has acquired the art of interpreting, because I had awakened to the meaning of the expression foreign dust, so that I won the holy fruit. World-honored one, Foreign dust is like a guest who stops at an inn where he passes the night or eats something and then continues his journey because he cannot stay longer. As to the host of the inn, he has nowhere to go. My deduction is that one who does not stay is a guest and no one who stays is a host. Consequently, a thing is foreign when it does not stay. Again, when the sun rises in the clear sky and its light enters the house through an opening, the dust is seen to dance in the ray of light, whereas the empty space does not move. I deduce that that which is still is the void, and that which moves is the dust. Consequently, a thing is dust when it moves. The Buddha said, correct. The Hinayanists inverted views. The Buddha then bent, straightened, and rebent his fingers and asked Ananda, what did you see? Ananda replied, I saw the Buddha open and close his fist. Then Buddha asked, you say that you saw my fist open and close. Was it my fist or your seeing that opened and closed? Ananda replied, as the Buddha's first opened and closed, I saw that it and not the nature of my seeing did so by itself. The Buddha asked, which one moved and which was still? Ananda replied, the Buddha's hand was not still. As to the nature of my seeing, which was already beyond the state of stillness, it could not move. The Buddha said, correct. Thereupon, the Buddha sent out from his palm a radiant light of rays of light to Ananda's right, and the disciple turned to look at it. Then he sent out another ray to Ananda's left, and the disciple turned to look at it. The Buddha then asked, why did your head move? Ananda replied, I saw the Buddha send out radiant rays of light to my right and left. I turned to look at them, and so my head moved. The Buddha said, as you turn to the right and left to see the Buddha light, is it your head or your seeing that move? Ananda replied, world honored one, it is my head that turns. As to my seeing, which is already beyond the state of stillness, how can it move? The Buddha said, correct. The Buddha then declared to the assembly, so every worldly man knows that which moves is dust, and that he who does not stay is a guest. You have seen Ananda, whose head moved of itself, whereas his seeing was unmoved. You have also seen my fist, which opened and closed of itself, whereas your seeings neither expanded nor contracted. Why do you still regard the moving as your body and surroundings, and so, from beginning to end, allow your thoughts to rise and fall without interruption, thereby losing sight of your true nature and indulging in backward actions? By missing the true mind of your nature and by mistaking illusory objects for yourselves, you allow yourselves to be caught in the will of samsara, thereby forcing yourselves to pass through transmigrations. The heretics' inverted view of annihilation. After Ananda and the whole assembly had heard the Buddha's words, their bodies and minds became calm and composed. They thought that, since the time without beginning, they had lost sight of their own minds by wrongly clinging to the shadows of their differentiated casual conditions, and that they had only now awakened to all this like a hungry baby who had not suckled for some time and suddenly saw its loving mother. They brought their palms together to thank the Buddha and wished to hear his teaching on the dual states of reality and unreality, existence and non-existence, and mortality and immortality of body and mind. King Prasennajit then rose and said to the Buddha, before I perceived the Buddha's instruction, I made Kakuda, Katyayana, and Sanjaya, Bhairatiputra, who both said that when the body died, its annihilation was called nirvana. Although I now met the Buddha, I'm still not clear about this. All those here who are still in the streams of transmigration wish to know how to realize that mind and prove that it is beyond birth and death. The Buddha said to King Prasennajit, great king, I now ask you about your body of flesh and blood. Is it permanent and indestructible like a diamond, or does it change and decay? The king replied, my body will decay and finally be destroyed. The Buddha asked, great king, you have not yet died. How do you know that your body will be destroyed? The king replied, world honored one, though my impermanent, changing and decaying body is not yet dead, I observe that it changes and decays without a moment's pause and is bound to go out like a fire that gradually burns out and will be reduced to naught. The Buddha asked, yes, great king, you are old now, but how do you look compared to when you were a child? The king replied, world honored one, when I was a child, my skin glowed, and when I grew up, I was full of vigor. But now, I age and weaken. I grow thin, and my spirits are dull. My hair is white, and my face wrinkled, so that I know I shall not live much longer. There is no comparison between now and when I was full of vitality. The Buddha said, great king, your appearance should not decline. The king replied, world honored one, it has been changing all the time too, imperceptibly for me to notice it. With the constant change of seasons, I've become what I am now. Why? Because when I was 20, though still young, I already looked older than when I was 10. While at 30, I was older still. As I am now 62, I'm older than at 50 when I was stronger. World honored one, I notice this imperceptible change in every decade, but when I look into it closely, I see that it has occurred not only yearly, monthly, and daily, but in each moment of thought. That is why I know that my body is destined to final destruction. The Buddha said, Great King, you observe this ceaseless change and know that you will die. But do you know that when you do, there is that which is in your body and does not die? The king brought his two palms together and said, I really do not know. The Buddha continued, I will now show you the self, nature, which is beyond birth and death. Great King, how old were you when you first saw the Ganga? The king replied, When I was 3, my mother took me to worship the Devajiva. As we crossed the river, I knew it was the Ganga. The Buddha asked, Great King, as you just said, you were older at 20, then at 10, and until you were 60, as days, months, and years succeeded one another, your body changed in every moment of thought. When you saw the Ganga at 3, was its water the same as it was when you were 13? The king replied, It was the same when I was 3 and 13, and still is now that I'm 62. The Buddha said, As you now notice your white hair and wrinkled face, there must be many more wrinkles than when you were a child. Today, when you see the Ganga, do you notice that your seeing is old now while it was young then? The king replied, It has always been the same, Lord Honored One. The Buddha said, Great King, though your face is wrinkled, the nature of this existence of your seeing is not. Therefore, that which is wrinkled changes, and that which is free from wrinkles is unchanging. The changing is subject to destruction, whereas the unchanging fundamentally is beyond birth and death. How can it be subject to your birth and death? Why do you bring out Maskari Gosiliputra's wrong teaching on total annihilation at the end of this life? Upon hearing this, the king realized that after death there will be no annihilation, but life again in another transmigrations. He and the whole assembly were happy and enthusiastic at the teaching which they had never heard before. The inverted behavior. After hearing this, Ananda rose from his seat, prostrated himself before the Buddha, brought his two palms together, and knelt, saying, World Honored One, if both seeing and hearing are beyond birth and death, why has the Buddha said that we have lost sight of our true nature and so acted in an inverted manner? Will you be compassionate enough to enlighten us and so wash off our defiling dust? Thereupon, Buddha lowered his golden-hued arm with his fingers pointing downwards and asked Ananda, As you now see my hand, is it in a correct or inverted position? Ananda replied, All worldly men regard this as inverted, but I myself do not know which position is correct or inverted. Ananda replied, The Buddha asked, If they hold that it is inverted, which position do they consider to be upright? Ananda replied, If the Buddha holds up his hand pointing to the sky, it will be upright. The Buddha then held up his hand and said, If worldly men so discriminate between an upright and inverted hand, they will in the same way differentiate between your body and the Buddha's pure and clean dharmakaya, and will say that the Tathagata's body is completely enlightened, whereas yours is upside down. If you look closely into your body and the Buddha's, where is this so-called inversion? After hearing this, Ananda and the assembly were bewildered and gazed fixedly at the Buddha without knowing whether their bodies and their minds were really inverted. Delusion and enlightenment are of the same source. The Buddha was moved with compassion and out of pity for Ananda and the assembly, said in his voice as steady as the ocean tide, Virtuous men, I have always declared that form and mind and all causes arising therefrom, all mental conditions and all casual phenomena are but manifestations of the mind. Your bodies and minds are just appearances within the wonderful, bright and pure, profound mind. Why do you stray from the precious, bright and subtle nature of fundamentally enlightened mind and so recognize delusion within enlightenment? Mind's dimness creates dull emptiness, and both in the darkness unite with it to become form. The mingling of form with false thinking caused the latter to take the shape of a body, stirred by accumulated causes within and drawn to externals without. Such inner disturbance is mistaken for the nature of mind, hence the false view of a mind dwelling in the physical body and the failure to realize that this body, as well as external mountains, rivers, space, and the great earth, are but phenomena within the wondrous bright true mind. Like an ignorant man who overlooks on the great ocean, but grasps at a floating bubble and regards it as the whole body of water in its immense expanse, you are doubly deluded amongst the deluded. This is exactly the same delusion as when I hold my hand down, and so the Tathagata says that you are the most pitiable people. Refuting the false perception to eliminate the fourth aggregate and reveal the non-existence of the seventh consciousness. Wiping out the unreal. The non-existence of discriminative perception. Ananda's wrong view. Ananda was moved to tears by Buddha's compassion and profound teaching, brought his two palms together and said, After hearing the Buddha's wonderful dharma, I realized that the wondrous bright mind is fundamentally perfect, so that I always dwell in my mind ground. But if my awakening has been due to Buddha's preaching, I have really used my casual mind to hear it with reverence, thereby merely realizing that I dare not pretend that it is the fundamental mind ground. Will you be compassionate enough to enlighten me as to remove my remaining doubts so that I can return to the supreme Tao? Unreality of illusory causes. The Buddha said, you're still using your clinging mind to listen to the Dharma, since, however, this Dharma is also casual, you fall to realize the Dharma nature. This is like a man pointing a finger at the moon to show it to others who should follow the direction of the finger to look at the moon. If they look at the finger and mistake it for the moon, they lose sight of both the moon and the finger. Why? Because the bright moon actually pointed at. They both lose sight of the finger and fail to distinguish between the states of brightness and darkness. Why? Because they may mistake the finger for the bright moon and are not clear about brightness and darkness. Likewise, if you mistake your intellect, which hears my preaching voice, for your true mind, the latter's discerning nature should be independent of that differentiated voice. For instance, when a traveler spends the night at an inn, he does so for a time and then leaves, not staying there forever. As to the innkeeper, he has nowhere else to go, for he owns the inn. It is the same with your mind. Falseness of both sense organs and consciousness. If it is your true mind, it has nowhere to go. Then why, in the absence of speech, has it no discerning nature of its own? This discriminating intellect does not arise only when I speak, but also when you discern my appearance. It has no discerning nature of its own when there is no form. It is not true mind, even when you reach the state in which all discrimination ceases, a state that is neither form nor voidness, which the heretics call primordial darkness. All phenomena returnable to causes are unreal. If that which has no discerning nature of its own ceases to exist in the absence of casual conditions, how can the so-called nature of your mind be an independent host if it disappears when it returns to its illusory causes? Borrowing the essence of perception to pick out casual externals, Ananda asked, if every state of my mind can be returned to its cause, why does the Buddha speak of the wondrous bright original mind which is not returnable to anywhere? Will you be compassionate enough to enlighten me? Setting up the essence of perception. The Buddha said, as you see me now, the essence of your seeing is originally clear. Although it is not the profound bright mind, it is like a second moon, but it is not a reflection of the moon in water. Now listen attentively to my explanation of that which cannot return anywhere. Picking out casual externals. Ananda, the doors and windows of this hall are wide open and face east. There is light when the sun shines, rises in the sky, and there is darkness at midnight when the moon wanes or is hidden by a fog or clouds. Your seeing is unimpeded through open doors and windows, but is obstructed where there are walls or houses. Where there is discrimination, you perceive the stirring causes, and in the dull void, you only see emptiness. An unconscious condition results from confused externals, whereas an awakened state leads to clear perception. Ananda, see now how I return each of these changing states to its casual origin. What are these original causes? Ananda, of these changing conditions, light can be returned to the sun. Why? Because there is no light without the sun, and since light comes from the sun, it can be returned to it. That is its origin. Darkness can be returned to the waning moon, clearness to the open doors and windows, obstruction to walls and houses. Causes to differentiation, emptiness to relative voidness, confuse externals to unconsciousness, and clear perception to the awakened state. Nothing in the world goes beyond these conditions. Now, when the essence of your perception confronts these 8 states, where can it be returned to? If to brightness, you will not see darkness when there is no light. Although these states, such as light and darkness, differ from one another, your seeing remains unchanged. The nature of perception. All states can be returned to external causes are obviously not you. But that which cannot be returned to anywhere, if it is not you, what is it? Therefore, you should know that your mind is fundamentally wonderful, bright, and pure, and that because of your delusion, stupidity, you have missed it, and so are caught on the wheel of transmigration, sinking and floating in the samsaric sea. That is why the Tathagata says that you are the most pitiable of men. The underlying nature of perception is not the essence of perception. Ananda asked, I now understand that the nature of perception cannot be returned to any external cause, but how can I know that it is my true nature? The capacity of perception. The Buddha said, Ananda, though you have not yet reached the state beyond the stream of transmigration, You may now use the Buddha's transcendent power to behold the first dhyana heaven without obstruction, like Aniruddha, who sees the world Jambudvipa as clearly as fruit, held in his own hand. Bodhisattvas can see hundreds and thousands of worlds. Buddhas in 10 direction can see all the pure lands as countless as the dust. As to living beings, the range of sight is sometimes limited to inches. Picking out casual objects. Ananda, as you and I see the palaces inhabited by the 4 heavenly kings with all that is there in water, on the ground, and in the air, though there is a great variety of forms and shapes in the light and darkness, they are but hindrances resulting from your differentiation of object phenomena. Here you should distinguish between your own self and external objects. From what you see, I now pick out that which is your own self and those which are but phenomena. Ananda, if you exhaust the field of your vision, from the sun and moon to the 7 mountain ranges, with all kinds of light, all that you see are phenomena which are not you. As you shorten your range, you see passing clouds and flying birds, the wind rising and dust, trees, mountains, rivers, grass, men and animals. They are all external and are not you. The essence of perception. Ananda, the great variety of things, far and near, when beheld by the essence of your seeing, appear different, whereas the nature of your seeing is uniform. This wondrous, bright essence is really the nature of your perception. The essence of perception mistaken for externals. Refuting this misconception, if seeing is an object, you should also see my seeing. If you can do as, why, when I do not see things, do you not see my non-seeing? Even if you do so, it will not be real but your false seeing. If you do not see my non-seeing, it follows that your seeing and mine are not objects. If so, why cannot your seeing be you? Again, if when you see an object, you grasp at it as such, it should also see you. If so, that object and the nature of seeing will mingle, and you and I, the world, will be in complete confusion. True perception. And then, when you see things, the seeing is yours and not mine, and its nature penetrates everywhere. If it is not you, what is it? Why do you still doubt about your real nature and ask me to confirm that it is not false? Wiping out the capacity of perception to reveal the true mind. The capacity of seeing. Anandas, Word Honor 1. If I am the nature of seeing, why, when the Buddha and I saw the palaces of the 4 heavenly kings and the sun and the moon, did this seeing first penetrate the whole world and then return to this vihara, then to its temple, and now to this hall with its eaves and corridors? Does the seeing which first pervaded the universe now return to and fill only this hall? Does its previous scale not shrink, or is cut up by the walls of this hall? I do not know. Where the meaning of all this really lies, will you be compassionate enough to enlighten me? Breaking up the capacity of seeing. The Buddha replied, Anand, all things in this world, whether large or small, inner or outer, as well as in other conditions, are external. You should not say that your seeing expands and contracts. Take, for instance, a square box, the inside of which is seen as containing a square of air. Now tell me, is the air seen as square in the square box really square or not? If so, it should not be round when poured into a round box. If not, then there should be no square of air in the square box. You say that you do not know where the meaning of all this really lies, but the meaning being so, where do you want it to lie? And if you want the air to be neither square nor round, just throw the box away. Since air has no location, you should not again insist on removing the place where it lies. If, as you just said, when you entered this hall, your seeing shrank into small compass, then when you look at the sun, do you lift it up to reach that sun in the sky overhead? If a wall can cut off your seeing, can you prevent it from peeping through a hole in the wall? Therefore, your contention is wrong. Revealing the real. All living beings, from the time without beginning, have disregarded their own selves by clinging to external objects, thereby missing their fundamental minds. Thus, they are being turned round by objects and perceive large and small sizes. If they can turn objects round, they will be like the Tathagata, and their bodies and minds will be in the state of radiant perfection. From their immutable holy sight, the end of each of their hairs will contain all lands in the 10 directions. Removing the essence of perception to wipe out the 5th aggregate and 8th consciousness. Eradication attachment to the ego to reveal the one reality. Anand asked, if this essence of seeing is my wondrous nature, the latter should manifest before me. If seeing is my real ego, then what are my body and mind? But in fact, my body and mind can discern things, whereas that seeing cannot discern my body. If perception is my mind and causes me to see things, then this perception is my ego, whereas my body is not. This is exactly what the Buddha previously refuted, with the argument that objects should then see me. Will you be compassionate enough to enlighten me? Rooting out Ananda's misconception of objects being and not being perception. Misconception of objects being perception, the Buddha replied. Anand, Your conception of perception being in front of you is incorrect because it is the essence of perception should have a position which can be shown. As you sit in Jetavana Park, you see its trees and nullas as well as this hall with the sun or moon overhead and the Ganga in the distance. As you are now in front of my lion seat, moving your hand to point to the surroundings, such as the dark following of the wood, the bright sun, blocking walls and clear open spaces, as well as grass, plants, and very small things, although they are of different sizes, each of them can be pointed out. If they are really your seeing manifesting in front of you, you should be able to show which one is your seeing. And then you should know that if voidness is your seeing, since it has already become your perception, then how can it be empty? If an external thing is your seeing and has already become your perception, how can it be external? So after dissecting all things in front of you, pick out the bright and pure principle of your perception and show it to me to prove that it is clearly and irrefutably identical with externals. Anand said, from this all, I now see the Ganga in the distance, the sun or moon overhead, and all that I can point out with my finger and see with my eyes. They are all external things, but not one of them is my perception. World Honored One, as the Buddha has said, not only a beginner in the Sravaka stage like myself, who is still in the stream of transmigration, but even a Bodhisattva cannot dissect things and pick out the essence of seeing which has an independent nature apart from phenomena. The Buddha said, correct, correct. This conception of objects not being perception. The Buddha said, as you have said, there is no essence of seeing with an independent nature apart from phenomena. Now, if there is no perception in the things you point out, I now ask again, as you and the Tathagata sit in this Jetavana Park, when you see the wood and all externals, including the sun or moon, is there? If there is no essence of seeing which can be picked out from them, tell me which one is not the seeing. Ananda replied, of all things seen in this Jetavana Park, I do not know which one is not seen. Why? Because if the trees are not the seeing, why do I see them? If they are the seeing, why are they trees? If the void is not the seeing, why do I see it? If the void is the seeing, why is it empty? I too have thought carefully about all this and now conclude that each one of them is the seeing. The Buddha said, correct, correct. In the assembly, all those who had not achieved the stage beyond study were very surprised at hearing the Buddha say this. They failed to understand his meaning and were perturbed and thrown off balance. The Buddha realized their perplexity and alarm and took compassion on them, saying, virtuous men, the words of the King of the Supreme Law are true, accord with reality, and are neither deceitful nor false, unlike those of the heretics whose sermons are arbitrary and aimless. Now listen attentively, your faith in me shall not be in vain. Manjushri's helpful interposition. Thereupon, Manjushri Bodhisattva, who took compassion on the four Varga, rose from his seat, prostrated himself at the Buddha's feet, brought his two palms together and said, World Honored One, these people do not understand the Tathagata's twofold revelation of the reality and unreality of the essence of perception in form and voidness. They think that if casual form and voidness are the seeing, there should be an indication of it, and if they are not, there should be no seeing. They do not understand your teaching and are therefore surprised and bewildered. But they are not like those whose roots are frivolous and inferior. May the Tathagata be compassionate enough to enlighten them, so that they know what objects and this essence of perception are fundamentally, and that there exists neither is nor is not between them. The Buddha declared to Manjushri and the assembly, to all Tathagatas and great Bodhisattvas of the 10 directions, abiding in the state of Samadhi, seeing and its concurrent causes as well, all forms imaginable, are like flowers in the sky which fundamentally do not exist. The seeing and its causes are essentially the profound, pure, and bright substance of enlightenment. How can there be is and is not within it? Manjushri, I now ask you this. You are already the real Manjushri. Can there be another Manjushri who first is and then is not? Manjushri replied, no, World Honored One. I am the real Manjushri and there cannot be another one. Why? Because if there is, then there will be two Manjushris. But my presence here does not mean that there is no Manjushri with an arbitrary conception of is and is not in between. The Buddha said, likewise, this clear seeing as well as the object seen and the void are fundamentally the perfect, pure, true mind of the wonderful, bright, supreme Bodhi wrongly perceived as form and voidness, as well as hearing and seeing, just as the second moon is perceived with the accompanying misconception of real and unreal moons. Manjushri, there is only one real moon which is beyond the condition of is and is not. Therefore, if you discern seeing and its object and give rise to all kinds of mental creation, this is wrong thinking which will prevent you from getting out of this dual condition of is and is not. If you look into them by means of this true, essential, wonderful, bright and enlightened nature, it will enable you to avoid this duality. Wiping out Alaya's self-evidence to reveal one reality. Ananda's discrimination. Ananda said, World Honored One, the King of the Law has preached the nature of casual enlightenment, Bodhi, which is always present in the 10 directions, and which is beyond birth and death, Does this differ from the concepts of primordial profundity, according to the doctrine of Kapila, and that of true ego pervading everywhere, according to heterodox ascetics who cover their heads with ashes and dust? The Buddha, while on Lanka mountain, once said to Mahamati, "Heretics always speak of natural existence, but I preach cause and conditions, which are beyond the stage they have reached. Now, as I look into this nature of enlightenment, it is self-existence, above birth and death, and beyond all falsehood and inversion. There seems to be neither your cause and conditions, nor their natural existence. Will you please teach us, so that we shall not fall into heresies, but win the bright nature of wonderful enlightened true mind?"